The crowd had barely settled into their seats when the roar of anticipation began to swell like a rising tide. In one corner stood the legend, Mike Tyson, the embodiment of raw power, a man whose name still sends shockwaves through the fight world. He wasn't just a boxer. He was a storm in human form, unpredictable, ferocious, and utterly mesmerizing. Across from him stood Stephan Bonnar, a warrior carved from a different mold. Gritty, relentless, and fueled by a spirit that refused to break, no matter the odds. He wasn't supposed to be in this kind of spotlight, not against a name that dominated entire eras. But there he was, unflinching, unshaken, and ready for something no one could quite predict. This wasn't a fight born from rankings or titles. It was something stranger, an intersection of eras, a battle between legacy and defiance. Tyson had built his name through brutal knockouts, and a presence that demanded fear. Bonnar. He had made his mark with heart, the kind that turned blood and bruises into unforgettable performances. Their paths shouldn't have crossed, but sometimes the fight gods conjure matchups that defy logic just to see what happens when chaos is unleashed inside the ropes. People didn't know what to expect. Tyson was older, sure, but he had that look in his eye, the same cold focus that once sent seasoned fighters scrambling. And Bonnar, never the fastest or strongest, had something even more dangerous: the refusal to quit. Fans flooded forums, lit up social media, debated endlessly. Would Tyson's fists still carry the same destructive weight? Could Bonnar withstand that kind of heat without folding? It was the kind of matchup that felt more like a clash of destinies than a sanctioned fight. What added fuel to the fire was the tension that simmered beneath the surface. Tyson had been quiet in the lead-up, letting short, clipped answers speak for him. Bonnar, on the other hand, seemed to relish the opportunity, throwing subtle jabs in interviews. Not disrespect, but sharp enough to sting. He talked about pride, about grit, about how this wasn't about surviving Tyson, it was about testing him, seeing if the storm still had lightning or just thunder. It was the sort of talk that didn't go unnoticed, especially by a man like Tyson, who built a career off silencing doubters with violence. By fight night, the arena didn't feel like a venue. It felt like a pressure cooker. The crowd wasn't just watching. They were bracing. Two fighters with nothing to prove and everything to defend stood inches from each other as the bell neared. Tyson clenched his gloves tighter. Bonnar didn't blink. And just as the referee looked at both men, signaling that it was time, a strange stillness took hold. Like the entire world held its breath, waiting for something primal to erupt. Then, as the bell rang and they moved toward each other, a flicker of something unexpected crossed Tyson's face. Not fear, not doubt, but something else. Something even more dangerous. Tyson moved first, not a wild swing, not the blitz fans might have expected, but a tight, calculated jab, more test than threat. Bonnar absorbed it with a smirk, like he had just brushed past a warning sign. He had no intention of obeying. The crowd leaned in, unsure of what they were witnessing. Tyson wasn't charging. He was calculating. That was the first sign that this wasn't going to be the kind of fight anyone had pictured. Bonnar didn't hesitate. He snapped a low kick to Tyson's lead leg. Not with full power, but enough to draw a raised eyebrow from the heavyweight icon. It wasn't a boxing match anymore. It was a puzzle. What had been billed as brute force versus heart had suddenly become something else entirely. A chess game in gloves. Bonnar, known for dragging opponents into wars of attrition, was doing something bold. He was trying to outthink Mike Tyson, and Tyson, rather than rushing into his usual storm, was adapting on the fly. The ring felt smaller now, as if the space itself had shrunk under the tension. Each movement mattered. Every feint held weight. Tyson's footwork was tighter than expected, and Bonnar was shifting angles, switching stances, trying to pull him into traps. Neither man looked desperate, but neither looked comfortable either. Then it happened, something no one had seen coming. A sudden pause in the second round as Tyson stepped back, shaking his glove. The ref intervened, briefly. A camera zoomed in. Something wasn't right with Tyson's left hand. Trainers exchanged glances. Bonnar stood still, respectful, but laser-focused. Some in the crowd thought it was a bluff, a mind game, but those closest to the ring saw it clearly. Tyson had thrown an overhand moments earlier that didn't land clean, and now he wasn't fully opening his left glove. Whether it was a strain or something worse, it shifted everything. Bonnar didn't pounce. Not yet, but the shift in energy was undeniable. Tyson, even compromised, still had power in that right hand, still carried the kind of danger that could erase everything with a single shot. But the left, the setup, the jab, the balance, it wasn't there anymore. The roles began to blur. Bonnar, the underdog, suddenly found himself with a path he hadn't expected, and Tyson, the predator, was now circling with a limp wing, still lethal, but exposed. The crowd's roar turned uneasy, almost nervous. Tyson kept moving forward, chin tucked, eyes locked in. He wasn't retreating. If anything, he looked more dangerous, like the loss of one weapon had only sharpened the others. But Bonnar wasn't blinking now. He started throwing combinations, not wild ones, but the kind that chip away at armor. There was an urgency in his corner now, a sense that this wasn't just a fight anymore. It was an opportunity. And maybe, just maybe, it was something even bigger. Because in between the corners, amid the swings and shifts, something else was surfacing. An old grudge. Not between the fighters, but between the camps. A conflict that had simmered out of sight, buried in past dealings, old interviews, and quiet resentment. And now, with Tyson possibly injured and Bonnar heating up, those old tensions were starting to bubble over. Right there, just beyond the ropes. The moment Bonnar stepped in with that lead elbow, the atmosphere snapped like a stretched wire finally giving way. Tyson dipped low, his right hand cocked like a spring, firing with terrifying precision. The punch didn't land flush, but it caught enough of Bonnar's chin to wobble him. Just enough to remind everyone watching that a wounded Tyson was still Tyson. Bonnar stumbled back, but his eyes stayed locked forward, blinking through the chaos as if he'd rehearsed that exact moment in his head 1,000 times. This wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about seizing something no one thought he could touch. What followed was a flurry that defied every prediction. Bonnar started pressing with combinations that didn't rely on power, but on precision, movement, and relentless pressure. Tyson, clearly favoring one hand, refused to back down. He pivoted off angles, threw short rights to the body, and even began walking Bonnar down in bursts, his left arm more of a decoy than a threat. It was surreal to watch, a legend reshaping his own game mid-fight, while the underdog fought like a man chasing destiny. Then, out of nowhere, chaos erupted just outside the ring. A scuffle near Tyson's corner spilled into view. Trainers, security, someone shouting about a payoff, accusations flying. Cameras caught glimpses, but no one could confirm what it was really about. The fight paused briefly, confusion swirling. Bonnar turned to look for a second, just long enough. Tyson launched forward with a looping right, catching him behind the ear. Bonnar crashed to the mat, and for a heartbeat it looked over. But he got up. Slower this time, hands shaking, balance unsure, but he stood. The referee checked him. Twice. Tyson was ready, breathing heavy, one arm useless, but his eyes still held fire. What followed was less a boxing match and more a gritty, exhausted dance between two men unwilling to surrender. They swung, they clinched, they pushed through pain neither had expected, and when the final bell rang, both collapsed into their corners, heads bowed, bodies broken but pride intact. The judges took longer than usual, murmurs rippling through the arena. When the decision came, it wasn't unanimous. Split, one for Tyson, one for Bonnar. The final card, draw. The crowd erupted with stunned silence, then disbelief, then applause. Not everyone agreed, but everyone understood. It wasn't about who won anymore. It was about what the fight had revealed. Later that night, footage surfaced, a leaked clip showing one of the men in Tyson's corner arguing with a figure tied to a known promoter. Allegations swirled. A side deal, an attempted fix gone sideways. Nothing ever proven, but enough smoke to make people wonder. Tyson never commented. Bonnar denied knowledge. But the fight lived on, not just in highlight reels, but in whispers, about what really happened, about how close the lines between legacy and manipulation can blur. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, two men had put everything on the line, not for titles, but for something far more rare: respect.